Guthrie, it's fantastic to have you here. We're thrilled. Guthrie comes to us from AWS, and he is going to give us a run through of Material Canvas. I will hand it off to you.
So my name is Guthrie Adams. As Nicole said, I've been working on the engine for quite a while. Been responsible for material editor and material component, most of the material editor workflows, and now Material Canvas. Prior to that, the dynamic vegetation and a lot of the procedural content generation support that we have in the engine. I'm going to talk about Material Canvas today. If I can share my screen. Here we have the main editor. So you just have it loaded with the automated testing project. The sponsor level open. You can launch Material Canvas from tools menu or shortcuts. It takes a couple seconds to load, but here it is. This is Material Canvas. It's a node-based visual scripting editor for creating materials and shaders. We have a node palette with all of these different node types, and the material output nodes are the nodes that essentially drive the type of material that you're trying to create. We have base PBR and standard PBR, which mirror a lot of the features and inputs that you would have from the existing stock material types. But instead of providing all of the options, switches, and configuration for those material types, and we just provide the inputs and you configure everything by creating your own custom logic and graph, which you can use to animate inputs or create custom effects. That's some pretty amazing results for people on Discord with their demos using Material Canvas and creating things like waving grass or eye effects, all kinds of amazing things that just come from the community. And so again, here you can see we have just this output node with one inspector with all of these properties that you can either type in and change directly in the inspector or do something like drag out from here is what you would do in Script Canvas, create an input node, link it, and then assign the value from the node instead. So as I'm making changes, this is also recompiling and updating in the background. All of these shaders and materials that get generated from making these changes and generating these graphs are assignable directly within the main editor for your other components and entities to be able to customize and override them as well. If you want examples of some existing features we have for existing graphs, we have several test graphs that I've already created as I work on new features. For example, there was a recent request for configuring color spaces. And so we have a graph that does that. Excuse the errors that pop up. This is after a recent conversion to our material pipeline system, where Material Canvas used to have more bespoke or custom shaders. So in these nodes, essentially you can configure your color space with your texture inputs, or there's another custom color space conversion node. And again, as you change these things, you can present yourself with the options, change them in real time. See if we can open something more interesting. Recently, someone requested view space or support for accessing the camera position. So I created a new node for this as well. As you can see, they get more complicated. This graph accesses the, one second, camera position. These can get pretty complicated, as you can see, like any other visual scripting, where we now have new support for accessing the camera view world position, and then again using that as input to build different shaders here. This effect is simply just accessing the camera position, but also using it to as an input to get the dot product against the surface of the objects being rendered, so that you can do things like glow effects along the edges. Anyway, this is built off of the same tech stack as Material Editor, Material Editor, Shader Management Console. These are the same foundation for all of these tools. Script Canvas, the foundation for that is also used to basically do all the node-based editing, provide some of the same UI that you see in those tools. It's really open-ended. I wish I had something more specific to show. There's just so much that you can do. What I'm really hoping is that because these nodes, all of the node types are data-driven, they're just little simple JSON files with snippets of shader code in them, that the community will be providing a lot of these to extend the tool. There are already a lot of these nodes in here with support for many of the intrinsic functions that come with other different shading languages, as here, and then some other custom ones that have been created. But The hope is that either using the built-in tools within Material Canvas, or people who just inspect and see the patterns in those JSON files that have been documented on the website, that they'll create a whole suite of nodes that will automatically get picked up in Material Canvas to extend its feature set. Yeah, so I'll leave that. If anybody has any specific questions, this is really a lot to cover here. A lot of it's already discussed in the documentation, but I can explain anything for anyone that has any specific questions.
Guthrie, would it be fair to say to users that Material Canvas is a way of creating materials without needing to understand how to write a shader?
Yes, exactly. So normally when you're creating new custom shaders, the engine is very data driven. So we have data formats for expressing configuration files for shaders. You can write your custom cell code, which is just the engine specific shader language that gets converted to whatever the target HI is, converting to HL, SL, or Vulkan or Metal. And writing the shader code, you're going to be open to errors that you would with any other code. Having to learn the language, learn all of the available functions, syntax, etc. And then iteration time is also a pain for that. When you're typing these things manually, dealing with the errors that you would encounter, and then having to go into the AP or the asset processor to review those kinds of things. So the iteration time for doing those things by hand and learning those file formats, etc., is painful. The time it takes, it's not painful. It just takes a lot of experience and practice and familiarity with the systems. And so what Material Canvas will do is, rather than having to manually code and navigate all of these different files that you need to create your shaders and material types and materials that are derived from those, Material Canvas allows you to do all of that through a single interface by creating your materials and shaders using this graph, and then producing all of those files automatically for you. And they're immediately ready to use without you having to navigate, know where to place things in specific folders in the engine, or any of the other complexity involved in that. Plus, as you see here, these things automatically update, so you can see the live preview as you make changes, and then literally just open up the main editor and start assigning any materials that you create from the graph. You can also take the material types and materials that you create here and use them like any others, open them up in the material editor to create new custom materials there, and you can just configure any different, configure them and customize them however you would otherwise. So it's a great simplification on top of what we had before, if you're familiar with using these kinds of tools.
Thanks, Guthrie.